Hey everyone, it's Maria, and today I'm going to do my celebration 800 subscribers video. This one is going to be the part 2 in the homeschool questions. There were way too many to put into one big video, so I divided it out. If you don't care about my homeschooling at all, go ahead and skip this video. But if you are slightly interested, hopefully I'll be able to clear up some questions you might have. I would love if you have more follow-up questions in the comments, or if I don't answer something quite enough, go ahead and ask again, or ask it differently, or something like that. All right, and I, again, did not put people's names associated with these just because everything got divided out and it was way too much to keep track of. So, first, a lot of people said, just tell me about homeschool. Why do you do it? How did you get started? What does your day look like? So I'll go ahead and start with that just because that's a little bit, it'll answer a lot of questions just from that. I have a 9-year-old who is doing about third grade work, a 7-year-old who's about second grade work, and a 3-year-old who does whatever the heck she wants. Sometimes we'll have things on the side for her. Sometimes she'll just go play by herself. And that's just kind of where we are. She is getting to learn her letters a little bit, and she's been practicing some of her hand-eye coordination, and she might do projects, but mostly we're pretty flexible with her. So really it's just my 9-year-old and my 7-year-old. We have been homeschooling for about 5 years. I think that's right. I didn't actually double check. But we have never been in the school system at all, which for me has always been what I wanted. I was homeschooled up until about third grade. I skipped a grade, then went to 1 year public school for 5th grade, 3 years of private school, 6th through 8th, back to public school for 9th and 10th, and then to a public residential boarding school, basically, for 11th and 12th. And that one was for academically accelerated kids. We were on more of a college schedule. And then I went to a private, smaller university for 4 years for my bachelor's. So that's kind of my education background. I had all the different kinds. But I I saw value in everything, but I really enjoyed homeschooling, and I'd always wanted to homeschool my kids since I was little. Learning is one of my favorite things. We do it mainly because I want to expose my kids to more than they would get in school. Travel is something that has been of high value in my family of origin, as well as the family we're in now. I love that homeschooling allows us the flexibility to travel. We got to go to England and Ireland a few years ago with the kids, which we wouldn't have been able to afford to do if it was done over spring or summer break. We've gotten to do South Dakota this past year when it was, again, off season, and it was perfect because there was hardly anybody there. Not that South Dakota has a lot of people there to begin with. But it was just things like that I really value. I love working on projects with my kids. I love exposing them to all different ideas from all over the world. I like answering their questions. I mainly do it not out of fear for what the school system is, but for love of learning. That is my primary motivation. I think fear is not a good reason to do anything. I'm sure you could find exception to that, but for me, that's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to create an environment where I could help my kids fall in love with learning and figure out how they learn best, because I think that's really important, especially from an early age, to find that. I used to be a youth pastor before we had kids, and I remember helping them with a lot of their homework and feeling very frustrated that they didn't like learning anymore. And I think some of them were very curious to begin with, and something happened to squash their love, and that bothered me. So that's probably why I do it. Now, my husband had a very different opinion about homeschooling. This was our longest running argument from probably our third date in college, because we met in college. We debated the merits of homeschooling or not for actually a decade. And we would get so angry, almost to the point of yelling, where we'd say, okay, let's take a step back and not talk about it for a while and breathe. And we did that until our oldest child was 3.5, 4, and we were going to have to make a decision about kindergarten or not kindergarten. And this is where one of my favorite tips on any life lesson comes in handy. I read a magazine article when they talked about how do you make a decision when there's only one path that you and the other person can take. Obviously, you can't have half of a child. You can't decide to move to one state or another. Like, you can't do both, at least not very feasibly. So how do you make those decisions where there's only one answer that you both have to come to? And the best answer, and I've given this advice several times, is to decide, okay, for the first 4 days, up to a week, whatever, you both decide to pretend in your minds that you've chosen option A. So one person's opinion. You discuss that option and pretend in your head like you've already both got on board completely with that answer. So for us, we talked about what it would be like if we homeschooled. What things were we nervous about? What things are we excited about? What will we miss out on? What will we be able to have? And we did that. The second time allotment for, I think, a week, we did the other. We talked about what it would be like if we put the kids into a school system and followed that train. And when neither person has their guards up and feels like they have to defend their position, you can get a lot more communication done and a lot more consensus, I think. My husband and I both realized that we had very different opinions. He had been educated by his parents at some point in a one-room schoolhouse. So they weren't necessarily homeschooled, but a similar setting. And it did not go well for him. His experience with the public school system was much different than mine. And so we had to talk about the discrepancy of what our views on what school could and couldn't be. And that's how we decided to homeschool. He also really appreciated the classical school approach, where there's a grammar, logic, and a rhetoric stage, and you kind of go through these cycles, peeling back the onion deeper each time. He liked the idea of teaching Latin and being able to read those Latin texts, and being able to analyze things, critically evaluate things. Those are the things that helped him to get on board with homeschooling when he was very much against it to begin with. I think we have gotten to a point where we're a little bit more comfortable. He used to be a lot more involved in planning what the school year would look like. This past year, life took over and he didn't have as much opportunity to do that. But we're very much both invested in figuring out what we want school to look like. And we have very different personalities. I'm much more flexible than he is on life. So it's been kind of a constant push and pull. But ultimately, I've really enjoyed the decision. So that is the long and short of how and why it got started. Now I will talk about what we do. Okay, so we kind of started off as classical as our model. And my husband would very much like me to stay in that bubble. But I don't stay in bubbles very well. So I have taken the classical approach. I've thrown in a little bit of Charlotte Mason as far as nature studies go into the mix. But the big probably influence on my schooling has been Julie Bogart with the Brave Writer approach. For those of you who don't know anything about homeschooling, Julie Bogart does have a YouTube channel, and I think she's phenomenal. She does a much better job than anybody I know talking about homeschooling and how to do it well. She makes me feel like simultaneously encouraged and empowered to do whatever I think is best, while giving me lots of ideas that I had never thought of. So I really appreciate her. The Brave Writer approach talks about kind of coming alongside your child, becoming their partner in learning, whether that is through writing. So sometimes my eldest does not have the stamina to write and write and write. But he has great ideas and great stories. So sometimes I will sit down with him and we'll go through his schoolwork and I will write out half of it for him or whatever I need to do. He's still doing the learning. I'm just helping doing the dictating. So we've done that kind of thing. She incorporates things like poetry tea time, Shakespeare, nature studies, art appreciation, which is a huge one for me because I love it. And we do have family who also enjoys art. She talks about putting travel in or field trips or party school where you might take a book that you're learning and have a themed book club party around that. We did that last year with Charlotte's Web. It was super fun. We've done things like Chinese New Year where we've had people over and done crafts and food and talked about legends and things. So those are the things that really excite me. Project-based learning is interesting to me where you kind of help follow the kid down their rabbit hole. You teach them the value of research and planning, documentation, using the things that they're already exciting to them. Some curriculum that I do use that I kind of, when I'm planning, Story of the World is one that I've really enjoyed. Susan Weisbauer, who wrote The Well-Trained Mind, which talks about classical education. Both of these books are really interesting to me. This is the third cycle of Story of the World. I enjoy Story of the World because it goes through global history, and I appreciate that. There are lots of different activities. We do not do all of the activities in here by any means, but there's a large resource list of stories and questions, so I will often use that as kind of the spine to figure out what we're going to be studying in history. At the same time, whenever we're studying something in history, I try and see what science things relate to that, what geography things relate to that, and so I will try and work those things in as well. If it involves cooking, we like to do that too. Elemental science is our science curriculum that we have used, although I am pretty loose with that as well. Chemistry is what we are doing this year, and so I just got several chemistry spines from the library, and we've kind of worked through talking about those things and the experiments from elemental science. Currently, they have a periodic table unit that we're doing, and so I've kind of deviated they're laughing in the other room still from that a little bit, and we have chemistry, like the periodic table cards from Theodore Gray that we go through. We have some chemistry games that we've done. The boys are both currently planning and working on a periodic table project. So my 7-year-old has the fabric all worked out, and we have to cut the fabric for doing a periodic table quilt. And my eldest is doing he has a blackboard, and he's getting paint chips from Lowe's and is going to do collage art with that to make a periodic table. So we kind of take those things and figure out how we can personally get excited about them and make them into our school. I also really enjoy introducing historical characters into their lives that especially are female, minority characters that maybe don't get as much play. I've enjoyed exposing them to podcasts like Stuff You Missed in History, or several different and there's so many great picture book biographies that we will read out loud. I really love history, is one of my passions, so I like to bring that alive, whether it's through historical fiction or introducing them to people in the past that they can look up to. So those are kind of the things that we do regularly. We use Singapore Math, the standards edition, although we also reinforce a lot with game schooling, which is another thing Julie Bogart talks about. We love board games, and so if there is a board game that I can weave into our learning, I will do that. Sometimes we make our own games. Today, my 9-year-old was working on a Lewis and Clark game that he has the map drawn out as the board game, and I'm not exactly sure how he's going to do everything, but it helps them understand that there are resources and characters that have worked together to to form something that could be kind of like a journey, and games are like that, you know. Okay, so that is kind of the overall synopsis. We do a lot of read alouds as well. I use the Arrow Brave Writer guides and do copy work and just a lot of discussion questions over different books that we are studying. Okay. Specific questions. How do I decide which books to supplement homeschool? First up, if Story of the World has some suggested resources for reading, I will try and find those. Honestly, Amazon. I will plug in books that we have enjoyed or books that I know are good, and I will see what is in the recommended section of Amazon. They do a great job with their algorithm to figure out which books kind of match up well. I really try and listen to own voices. So if there is a historical fiction book about slavery, I will do my darndest to make sure that is written from an African American perspective. If there is a picture book that has an illustrator, I really look at illustrations hard to make sure that they don't just have a bunch of white people in it. That's important to me. So those are kinds of things that I look for when I'm choosing books for my homeschool. I try and get diverse opinions, beautiful illustrations, something that is accessible for all three of my children. My 9-year-old is not too cool for picture books. He enjoys them just as much, and he loves art. So I think illustrations really play into that. But a lot of school sometimes is sitting on the couch with a stack of books, reading through it. And if it's a book that I don't love, then I just kind of put it back on the shelf, or I'll peruse it when I get home. I use my library hold system all the time. Our librarians are very familiar with us. So those are some ways that I start deciding about what books to use. I love listening to other homeschoolers' recommendations. Emily from our schooling always has great ones. Her kids are a little bit older than mine, and so sometimes I'll just directly ask her if it's something that we should wait for or not. But I will browse the library section to look for diverse books from that time frame to kind of match up with what I'm trying to teach. Do I pre-read books before that are read aloud? If they are picture books, I generally don't. For instance, we just read one the other day that was horrible. The Girl Who Wouldn't Brush Her Hair. I got it for my 3-year-old because she just doesn't, she's the whole tangly hair thing. The illustrations were gorgeous in it. I'd seen it on several book lists, but the premise in the book, she stops brushing her hair and a family of mice moves into her hair. And while they are cute, cuddly cartoon mice, I couldn't stomach reading through it. It was so disgusting. So that one slipped under my radar. If I am reading aloud and I see a sentence or two that is problematic, I skip it, or we talk about it. I make that call in the moment. I follow enough either podcasts that talk about children's literature that is really good, so I don't run into many books that I'm worried about. I also don't really care about censoring them from, we don't read a lot of sex or violence in the books yet, but I don't care if there's a word or two in. I don't mind, but I don't think that's something I run into a lot. So mainly I don't pre-read anything. There are some books from my childhood that I will bring back that I'm pretty familiar with, like the Little House books. I was actually a little nervous about because I know they're not, we listened to those on audio, and I knew that the Ma character has some problematic things to say about Native Americans. But I just used that opportunity to talk about opinions back then and what we know now, and called it good. And I think we really still enjoyed them. Oh, sorry, the light just changed a lot. We really enjoyed them, even if they had some things that I wasn't too keen about. Okay. How do people react to hearing that I'm homeschooling, and how does that impact me? Most of the time, you get two different things. Okay, these are the two things that people say when you're homeschooling. The first thing that they say, how do you socialize the kids? Like and I kind of laugh at this one because I was homeschooled and I'm one of the most social people that most people, at least I come off like that. So I will often say, well, I was homeschooled for quite a while and I've never had problems making friends, which is true. That said, normally what they are asking is, are you involving them in other groups? So then I will start going through the litany of, which is another question, what groups are you part of? We used to do a co-op for several years, and then I was putting more energy into it than I was getting out of it. So now we do a nature group a couple times a month that meets pretty informally and does nature studies. I have several homeschooling families that we've done field trips with. They are involved in a gym class once a week that they go to. My boys do Cub Scouts. My eldest and now my middle has started on a swim team, which is 5 nights a week for the oldest and 2 nights a week for the middle. My middle does piano lessons, which is not with people, but he does get out to do that. We do library story time. The library also has some homeschool programs that we have been a part of before. I have a group of people who we've done homeschool science fair. We've done we did one for the solar eclipse when that came through. We did the Junior Ranger packets together. So those are just a sampling of the things that they get. We also go to church every single week, and have friends that have children that they are also very close to. So I've never really worried about the socialization aspect of it. That's the first question people always ask. Well, I hope you're getting them socialized. Yes, I am. The second thing that people always say is, oh, wow, you must be really amazing. I could never do that. To which I also laugh because I've had a lot of friends that have considered homeschooling in the last couple of years, and whether it meant taking their children out and starting over or what. And the thing that I will always say is there is no perfect solution. There are days where homeschooling is the hardest choice, and there are days where it is the easiest choice. There are things I don't have to worry about. I don't have to worry about working around schedules. I don't have to worry about people bullying the kids quite as often. You know, there are situations where that comes up, but there are certain things that I don't have to deal with because I homeschool. And I have most of my best friends are sending their children to school. So I know how hard it is to send your child to school. That said, there are days where, I have a hard day and I need to have more of my own space. There are days where I won't talk to another grown-up, especially if my husband's out of town for work or something. And so those are the hard things about homeschooling. And either way, it's just a different choice. There are so many opportunities, resources available. I think really the thing is to figuring out what works for you and who you're choosing to listen to, because you could get really down on yourself from all the things that you aren't doing. But that would happen regardless of what school situation you had. Parenting is hard all around the board. So that is my 2 cents on that. Okay, those are the reactions I get from people. Either I'm a saint or I'm crazy. My in-laws had a really hard time when we decided to start. But I think one of the things that we've done is just involve them in hearing all the things that we are doing, and that helped ease their concerns a lot. So I know some people worry about that. All right. I'm trying to hurry up, but I'm at 24 minutes already. All right. Tips on homeschooling 3 kids. Okay. My tips on homeschooling 3 kids. First of all, if you have an infant and you are concerned about how to homeschool with an infant, don't be. Be concerned about how to homeschool with a 3-year-old. Enjoy the infant, because really all you can do right now is just put them in a sling and call it good. No, but seriously, I do a lot of zones. I try and choose the 1 or 2 things that each child is struggling with that I know they need more attention on. And I spend individual time with them on those things. And then everything else I teach as a group. That has been really helpful to me. to figuring out. So they each have their one-on-one mom time. That's another hard thing about homeschooling, is balancing the mom versus the teacher. I try and make sure that they're each getting individual time. That said, when it comes to group things that I can do, I might just do that on different levels. My boys are both pretty similar on where their math skills are right now. So we'll do our math together, and that's fine. Sometimes I'll even have them check each other's work. Science you can do together, history you can do together. A lot of the times for me, it's just read aloud and have them work on whatever page or project they want to work on. So those, a lot of school is just discussing and asking questions. We'll brainstorm all the questions we can. I read a book recently on question-based learning, and I just really stuck. So that's another thing that we do. Lots of read alouds together, and come up with a lot of things that your youngest can do without you having to be there. Like play mags has been a godsend. The kinetic sand, we do watercolors, Play-Doh. Those are things that I always have on hand that I can stick in front of her while we're doing something at the table, and she still feels involved. Have your eldest or your middle, like whoever is old enough to read, have them practice their reading with their younger siblings. That is another great tip, because it's non-threatening practice. Obviously, your 2 or 3-year-old is not going to correct them. It's a good way to do sibling bonding. My children are very close because they're used to being together, and I think that's been a benefit of homeschooling. So that's another tip that I have, is do that. And then snacks. Make sure you always have snacks. We love tea time, where we'll do read alouds or poetry together, or listen to an audiobook, and we're just eating some snacks together. That make learning as pleasurable as possible, and that is how homeschooling gets done well. I think that is all of the questions, because I already answered that one. So 27 minutes, hopefully it wasn't too long, but that's homeschooling in a nutshell. I could probably say a million more things on here, but that's my overview. I will talk to you all later. Bye.